Although it was so brilliantly fine, the blue sky powdered with gold, and great spots of light like white wine splashed over the jardin's publics. Miss Brill was glad that she had decided on her fur. The air was motionless, but when you opened your mouth, there was just a faint chill, like a chill from a glass of iced water before you sip, and now and again a leaf came drifting from nowhere, from the sky. Miss Brill put up her hand and touched her fur. Dear little thing, it was nice to feel it again. She had taken it out of its box that afternoon, shaken out the moth powder, given it a good brush, and rubbed the life back into the dim little eyes. What has been happening to me? Said the sad little eyes. Oh, how sweet it was to see them snap at her again from the red eider down. But the nose, which was of some black composition, wasn't at all firm. It must have had a knock somehow. Never mind. A little dab of black sealing wax when the time came, when it was absolutely necessary. Little rogue! Yes, she really felt like that about it. Little rogue, biting its tail just by her left ear, she could have taken it off and laid it on her lap and stroked it. She felt a tingling in her hands and arms, but that came from walking, she supposed, and when she breathed, something light and sad. No, not sad. Exactly. Something gentle seemed to move in her bosom. There were a number of people out this afternoon, far more than last Sunday, and the band sounded louder and gayer. That was because the season had begun, for although the band played all the year round on Sundays, out of season it was never the same. It was like someone playing with only the family to listen. It didn't care how it played if there weren't any strangers present. Wasn't the conductor wearing a new coat too? She was sure it was new. He scraped with his foot and flapped his arms like a rooster about to crow, and the bandsmen sitting in the green rotunda blew out their cheeks and glared at the music. And now there came a little fluty bit very pretty, a little chain of bright drops. She was sure it would be repeated. It was. She lifted her head and smiled. Only two people shared her special seat, a fine old man in a velvet coat, his hands clasped over a huge carved walking stick, and a big old woman sitting upright with a roll of knitting on her embroidered apron. They did not speak. This was disappointing, for Miss Brill always looked forward to this conversation. She had become really quite expert, she thought, at listening as though she didn't listen, at sitting in other people's lives, just for a minute while they talked around her. She glanced sideways at the old couple. Perhaps they would go soon. Last Sunday, too, hadn't been as interesting as usual. An Englishman and his wife. He was wearing a dreadful Panama hat, and the wife was wearing button boots. And she'd gone on the whole time about how she ought to wear spectacles. She knew she needed them, but that it was no good getting any. They'd be sure to break, and they'd never keep on. And he'd been so patient. He'd suggest everything: gold rims, the kind that curved round your ears, little pads inside the bridge. No, nothing would please her. They'll always be sliding down my nose. Miss Brill had wanted to shake her. The old people sat on the bench, still as statues. Never mind. There was always the crowd to watch. To and in front of the flower beds and the band rotunda, the couples and groups paraded, stopped to talk, to greet, to buy a handful of flowers from the old beggar who had his tray fixed to the railings. Little children ran among them, swooping and laughing. Little boys with big white silk bows under their chin, little girls, little French dolls, dressed up in velvet and lace. And sometimes a tiny staggerer came suddenly rocking into the oven from under the trees, stopped, stared, suddenly sat down, flop, until its small, high-stepping mother, like a young hen, rushed scolding to its rescue. Other people sat on the benches and green chairs, but they were nearly always the same. Sunday after Sunday, and Miss Brill had often noticed, there was something funny about nearly all of them. They were odd, silent, nearly old, and from the way they stared, they looked as though they'd just come from the dark little rooms or even cupboards. Behind the rotunda, the slender trees with yellow leaves down drooping, and through them just a line of sea, and beyond the blue sky with gold-veined clouds. Tum, 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 tiddle, tiddle, tum, tiddle, tum, ta, blew the band. Two young girls in red came by, and two young soldiers in blue met them, and they laughed and paired and went off arm in arm. Two peasant women with funny straw hats passed, gravely leading beautiful smoke-colored donkeys. A cold, pale nun hurried by. A beautiful woman came along and dropped her bunch of violets, and a little boy ran after to hand them to her. And she took them and threw them away as if they'd been poisoned. Dear me! Miss Brill didn't know whether to admire that or not. And now an ermine toque and a gentleman in grey met just in front of her. He was tall, stiff, dignified, and she was wearing the ermine toque she'd bought when her hair was yellow. Now everything, her hair, her face, even her eyes, was the same color as the shabby ermine, and her hand, in its clean glove, lifted to dab her lips, was a tiny yellowish paw. Oh, she was so pleased to see him, delighted. She rather thought they were going to meet that afternoon. She described where she'd been everywhere, here, there, along by the sea.